fellas, we're back with another Ask Tony Tuesday.
If you haven't got a clue, Tony's got the answer for you.
How are you today, Tony?
Awesome, and yourself?
I'm great.
Good.
Are you ready for your first question of
I'm
the
ready.
day?
Yes.
How do you protect your stone from outdoor weather?
Outdoor weather. Okay, so the first thing is you want to choose the right stone for outside. Quartz, I would not use outside because quartz is man-made and it's composed of resin that binds everything together. So that will fade over time. So quartz, I would not do. I would always pick a granite unless it's covered. And unless it's covered, I would choose a tight grain granite. The tight grain, those are usually the ones that are more consistent. The stuff that has a lot of movement and variation, what happens is those usually have a lot of mica in it. So if we were in Florida, I would say, that's fine because we don't, in Florida, it's warm weather all year round. Here, we get bad weather in the wintertime. So what happens is moisture gets into the stone, it freezes, and it gets into that where that mica is and it starts to pop. So the surface starts to get rough. So one, I would choose a tight grain granite. Two is I would cover it. In the wintertime, it's an investment, so you want to take care of it. So in the wintertime, I would cover it, get a tarp or whatever, cover it. This way it stays nice. And then when spring rolls around, you uncover it. You take denatured alcohol, which you can get at any hardware store. It's usually in the paint section. And some triple or really fine, ultra fine steel wool. You go roll the top of it. It takes all that, anything that's on surface, pollen, any buildup of, drinks. Maybe you had a lot of parties over the summer and the drinks are spilled on there and nobody ever cleaned it off. So it gets all that off and then you get that nice factory polish back. So again, tight grain granite, cover it during the winter months and then clean it up real nice in the spring.
I know I've had somebody ask me before, is there any sort of sealer that protects it from weathering at all that you can get?
Well, we seal pretty much everything, and the sealing keeps it from staining. And it closes the pores of the stone. But moisture's still going to get in a lot of these materials that have these tiny fissures from mica and stuff like that. And, when moisture gets in there, and it's just the weather. I mean, we can't do anything about the weather. You just want to try to keep the moisture out so when it does get cold, it doesn't freeze and pop.
I know darker, dense stones are really good for outside.
Yeah.
And I know you're not supposed to put quartzite outside, but if you have a really dark quartzite, is that dense enough?
Well, you could do quartzite is actually very hard and very dense. I would stay away from the white ones. The white ones tend to be softer, and that's just basically any stone. Again, if it's out exposed to the elements, you're more limited. If you have a covered area, then you could even use quartz if it's covered because it's not getting direct sunlight. You're getting it out of the elements. So then anything is usable. It's just, like I said, with the weather that we have here, you want to avoid, with quartz, the sun exposure. And with granite, especially a granite that's not a tight grain material, you want to avoid, the rain and the freeze and the thaw. Tight grain, steel gray, stuff like that. Those granites, really super tight grain, pretty much you don't have to do much with them at all.
Second question of the day.
Okay.
What is the hardest part of fabrication?
The hardest part of fabrication is the edge work, especially when you're dealing with a stone, again, that has a lot of mica or anything in it. Sometimes you're limited to the type of edge you can do. If it has a lot of mica or big crystals of quartz, when you go, you saw when we just put a video on doing an OG edge. When you try to do an OG edge on a stone that has a lot of mica or quartz crystals in there, so when you're trying to run that bit across, a lot of times that starts flaking away or starts blowing out. So then you have to glue it, do it again, more glue, do it again. So the type of stone will make, again, the more dense the material, the easier it is to do. Stuff that has a lot of mica and big crystals, of course, makes it tougher. Also, sometimes you'll have a stone like a rainforest green or rainforest brown that have those big, giant, lightning bolt type veining. A lot of times those veins are what they call a mud vein or a dry vein, where they'll actually separate. You don't know, but you move it, you put it on a saw, next thing you know, it separates. The good thing about it is because they have those big giant veins there, you can fix it. They usually always have the fiberglass mesh on the back, which keeps it together. But then you have to do a lot of fiberglass or metal rotting. And that's more for us. Once it's installed, the customer doesn't have to worry about it failing. It's just for us to move it around, get it in the house. Then we have to do extra. There was a time we had to put in 1/2-inch steel rebar in the back of a slab, in the back of a stone, because it was so brittle and it had such a big overhang. The last thing we wanted somebody to do was lean on it and have it snap off.
Yeah, that would be scary.
Yeah, so we do everything necessary to make sure it doesn't just stay together for us, that it stays together when people have it for years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just certain stones, the more variation, the more movement, the more mica, the more labor involved in doing the fabrication.
Yeah. I know one of the guys in the shop always talks to me about sometimes when he's doing quartzite edges, how it'll chip a lot doing them, so he has to go back and make sure he's doing everything very carefully.
You have to do it very slow. It's usually dense, and there's a lot, when it has a lot of veining, there's usually a lot of, it could be dense, but then according to the veining, it could get hard, then softer, then harder, softer again. So you almost have to listen, because as you're cutting it or you're profiling it, you can actually hear it, the pitch of the bit, whether it's harder or softer material. So it comes with, you have to push a little bit, take some pressure off. More pressure, take some pressure off. So, but that comes from experience. Because if you don't do that, you end up with a wavy edge. And you don't want a wavy edge. You want it that it looks nice and straight when you look down it.
Right.
And if you look at when we did the Dracar quartzite, you look down that edge, it is perfectly straight.
Yeah.
And that comes from years and years of experience.
I couldn't do that.
You could if you did it long enough, yes.
Maybe.
I'm sure you could.
But those are all the questions I have for you today.
Okay.
Thank you for answering our questions.
My pleasure as always.
We will be back next week with another episode, and we hope you guys have a wonderful week. Thanks for tuning in.
If I had an 8 name, I would call myself Crushed Ice. Smells good in here. What is that? It's a good clean scent.